didn't target individual citizens, but they went to citizen groups such as sports associations or museums or schools, and they basically told them, well, we need your help, we need your time, we need your money, could you please help us to bring the parks back to a better condition? And these, on the condition that these groups would get more influence on decision making, what would happen with these parks. So for example, you would get baseball clubs and football clubs organizing all kinds of activities in these parks for the youth of New York City, and they would go there, and young people would come there again, and so parks, as a consequence, they became prettier, they became safer, they became livelier, and it didn't cost the city any money. They lost a bit of influence about what they could do with the parks in the future, but they figured, well, this is a good solution to our problems. Another example of user-based co-creation is in the Netherlands. It's in a municipality called Land, which is very difficult, I think, if you're not from the Netherlands. But basically, the Netherlands, at least the western part of the Netherlands, where this municipality is one of the most densely populated areas in the world. I think only Bangladesh is more densely populated. I will hurry. And they have this piece of nature, but the municipality, they didn't have any money to keep it up. So same situation as in New York. And what they did is they sold permits for 45 houses to be built in this area on the condition, one, that these houses are climate neutral, and two, that the people who buy these properties here, they're not only responsible for the upkeep of their own house, but also of the nature around them. So that makes it accessible for other people to go there, but the city is no longer in charge of keeping it up, and it doesn't cost them money. So the homeowners become responsible. And for them it's attractive because they can live in a nice environment, and it's pretty, and blah blah, and it's cheap. So there's also community-based co-creation, and especially when it comes to saving costs. I saw some interesting examples. There was this other municipality in the Netherlands, and they were trying to decide where do we need to cut on expenses. And they decided, let's ask the population of our city. And they sent a survey to a panel, and they asked them, okay, we need to save money, what do you think, where do we need to cut? And I think it's a very optimistic approach. And they published the results online. I had a good laugh because the results of this are very cynic. There are 611 people who, 320 people who replied, and more than half of all the initiatives that they came up with were about cutting down on expenses of the administration. So, especially, I had a very good time reading all the open comments, because there were these things like spend less money on remodeling the city hall. Less parties and receptions in City Hall was also one. Fire the mayor, apparently he costs money, so we don't need him. My favorite one was the one on the bottom. Civil servants should go and do some actual work instead of just driving around and drinking coffee. But they were nice enough to acknowledge that this does not apply to the ones who are doing good work. So I would say this didn't yield very positive results, and also the bureaucrats who were then, whose job it was to consider these, because they had to do something with this, they reported on the first page of the report that they wrote that the results make it apparent that the rationality of the average respondent is not sufficient to contribute to our understanding of such a complex and abstract matter. So basically it's a very administrative way of saying, well, you guys are all stupid and we don't agree and we're going to do whatever. So not such a success story. I think a better way, another municipality in the Netherlands, they had basically the same idea, but they didn't go to individual citizens, they went to politicians, staff, businesses and institutions. And they actually, those parties, which was a very intensive process because they went there to interview them, so no survey, they came up with over 750 ideas to cut. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. This is probably a better approach to come up with real content. The downside of this is that it takes a lot of time. There were 750 ideas, so they had to calculate all the benefits, and it takes a lot of work. And in the end, the council still decides. So it's a moderate way of putting citizens in charge. So I will very quickly reflect. Last slide. So I think advantage of this is that especially the community-based co-creation, it's very easy to do nowadays because you use information technology, you use social media to get citizens on board, and it's not only a way to cut back on expenses, I would say. The New York example shows that it's also a way to make the public more responsible for what's happening in the city. So it's actually a way to create public value. So those are the upsides. I would say there's also a lot of downsides. As I said at the beginning, I'm trained as the old public administration guy, so I'm basically very negative about all of this. But I would say one of the barriers to this is the traditional narrow mindset of bureaucrats. Like myself, we don't like it when everyone is involved, you know. And I think the example of this survey shows that even if there are some good ideas, the bureaucrats that eventually decide, they may not be convinced that this is really a good idea. Another threat, and I think this is a major one, is that co-creation is also very often used as sort of a way of window dressing, saying, hey, we're giving people more responsibility and you can cooperate. But when you look at it critically, it's just a way of cutting on expenses. And I think this happens a lot now in healthcare, for example. In the Netherlands, we used to have a very good system where if your father or your mother or your grandfather would get old, they would go to a nice retirement home. And now that's only if there's really serious health issues. And now the government says, well, you keep your grandparents in your house, you take care of them and fix it yourself. And they say this is a way of making people responsible and we create public value together. Well, you know, I would say my grandfather is 91 years old. I would say this is just a way of cutting back on expenses because, you know, I don't have the time to do all of this. And I think other threats here are what we talked about at the end of the previous session, that there are some competing values with this line of thinking. We're thinking about collaborating, or we're thinking about innovation and about working together. But the other systems, I would say, especially the old public administration one, is not a bad system because it has a lot of advantages. For example, accountability. What happens if something goes wrong? I mentioned it before.
Only one sentence.
Okay. Can I think of a really long sentence? No? So, but I mean, I'm sure that you can yourself reflect on some of the downsides of this, and I would advise you, if you use this sort of co-creation or innovation, that you keep this in mind, because this is not a magic bullet to fix everything in the world. There are also downsides to this, but maybe that's something for the discussion. It was more than one sentence, huh?
It was a long one.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So I won't get up because we're informal. It's time for Michele.
Yeah, me. Yeah, it's not that one.
I will remove my disc and
Okay.
So,
maybe questions and answers.
well, we're gonna have session later. Do you want to have maybe like a micro Q&A session, like if there's one or two immediate questions, and then after we'll have a group discussion.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah.
Hey, quick ones like that. Nice, quick little. If you don't have it, you don't have it.
No?
Yeah, just in case somebody's burning like an immediate thing. Otherwise, we'll save it later. You want?
Got a question, because in your presentation before you said information is the most important thing more important than participation, and this is all the time is going to the participation ones, that you involve the population.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said before, I'm not the biggest fan of this model because I think there's several downsides.
Of which model? The information or the participation?
Oh, I meant of the co-creation, social innovation type of. But I don't think I understand the question.
As I remember from your presentation before, you said that information for individual actors is more important than the participation in these processes, to involve them.
Yeah, okay, well in the previous presentation I focused on two different things. So one is decision making, and there I would argue information is very important. And I think some of the examples I gave here are actually a way of getting information as a public administration on what to do by asking citizens and involving them. So I think that's a way of getting information. The thing about participation in the previous presentation is that when you actually implement budget cuts in your own organization, at least the study that we conducted, it shows that if you involve people in making budget cuts, so that perhaps also applies to citizens, it doesn't make it less harmful to them per se. I mean, it's a nice way perhaps to get information, but maybe the healthcare example, that you have to take care of your own grandparents now, but also shows if they allow you to participate in that, it's still not favorable for you. So it's still not a beneficial situation.
Yes? Ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Michele Lucas. I know a number of you. What I would say straight off is I don't work for the Cabinet Office. Let me make that very clear. I actually work for a local authority, but what I'm doing today is I'm going to give you a strategic overview of what the UK government are doing around public sector and how we can enable services to continue in what is a very, very challenging financial climate. And what I'm hoping to do then is to work with you about what Thurrock are doing. So what's Thurrock's response to that? And I did say right at the start, I need your help with something. So hold that thought for a while because there's some help required. So, okay. The Cabinet Office says that their view of what this looks like, a commercial model is, it's an organisation that has spun out of the public sector. That's what we're all talking about, how we take things out of the public sector and do them differently. It continues to deliver public services. The key is around involving a high degree of employee control. One of the things that central government in the UK are keen on is employee control. So employees being able to say what's going on in your organisation, how can you make a difference? And if we consider some of the things we spoke about this morning around what makes employees tick, so what enables them to feel positive about what they're doing, that was one of the key things that our colleagues spoke about that communication and engagement. So that's the driver there. So, began very small. So in Q4 2010 there were 9, and the term is spin out. Interesting term, but the UK called it a spin out from public sector into a